Hi everyone, welcome to the continuation of the Stafford University Christmas lectures, and this is the last talk we'll have on with us today. We have Reese Williams today talking with us about the sustainability of esports in the wider ecosystem. Jamie, do you partake in esports much yourself?
Apart from being the world's worst League of Legends player, no.
Now, I do have some friends that will play games competitively, and they watch the Overwatch League, but I don't hear many good things about Overwatch League recently with some of the teams. But I don't know much about esports. Maybe Reese could can fill us in on
I'm
that.
excited.
Yeah, I am too. This is something I know very little about. As an academic, so I'm very excited to hear a professional talk about esports. So,
Let's
well,
get Reese in here and start off.
Raju, we'll get Reese in and we'll get started.
Hello, how's it going, everyone? So, first up, let me start up by saying who actually knows what esports is. I mean, this seems like a basic question, but it's it is something that not a massive amount of people actually know what it's about, and a lot of the definitions that are used are often kind of definitions that they're not outdated, but they're very, very much scratching the surface. So, in general, I'm going to make it as kind of easy to kind of follow along as possible. So I'll be explaining a lot of the kind of points that I'm going to mention. We'll get into kind of what esports even is, and then kind of go from there. So today we will be kind of discussing the sustainability within esports. What are some of the kind of current issues that we have? And so a lot of people often throw this terminology around of esports winter. So I think that is personally a bit of a red herring. So we will kind of go over that in a little bit more detail because it's a term that a lot of people throw around, but I don't think a lot of people have really looked into what it does genuinely mean. So yeah, so we'll be covering I say class, like why not? And so we'll be covering kind of what is esports, my background in the industry, so why do I know what I'm talking about, some of the current issues that I see in the industry at the moment, how we can solve them, and then kind of the future of esports. What is esports going to look like in 5 years time is personally my prediction. What is it going to potentially look in 10 years time? So the landscape around esports is a very kind of chaotic landscape. It's almost volcanic in its nature, in the fact that there will be rises of kind of pressure in certain areas, and that will often throw esports as a whole off. But I don't think this is how it should be. So we will kind of go into those topics as well. So to start off, what is esports? Now, it's very much thrown around what it is. We do have the Google definition. So according to Google, esports is a multiplayer video game played competitively for spectators, typically by professional gamers. So that's kind of the standard definition of what esports is. It does kind of just about scratch the surface. Now we're in a position in esports where we have kind of started pushing ourselves away from the whole kind of it's a sport kind of area, because esports isn't a sport, even though it's got sport in the name. It's a lot more than that. And I think one of the kind of big things that holds back the industry is the lack of being able to distinguish what is esports and what does esports actually mean for a lot of people. So we'll talk about some topics here. Maybe we'll go a bit controversial considering it's games. We'll have a look in a bit. So what I actually think esports encompasses that a lot of people don't realize. Now, this picture was actually from this year's League of Legends World Championship. As you can see, it is a fully packed out arena, and there is tons and tons of people in it. So this is actually the Gochoik Skydrome. I don't actually know if that's the pronunciation, but this was where it was hosted. It was in South Korea, and this kind of dome alone holds roughly about 17,000 people. So obviously, when you take some away for the stage and the design and stuff like that, it does kind of shorten it down a little bit. But esports is about a lot of different things. Now, one of the biggest things that esports is for me, it's the ability to include everyone in the same task. Now, the reason why I specify that is because esports is becoming more of a culture. So it's less becoming about, just 10 people or however many people join up in a room, they play their favorite game against each other and then go about their day. It's becoming a much bigger than that. You have entire, like, the communities that back these teams are absolutely massive. We had things such as the Red Bull event that was on yesterday, I think it was, over the weekend, where they basically got the World Championship team, T1, and they got them to play against a load of kind of teams in Europe. Obviously, some of those teams were teams like KC, who KC are very much known for being a massive kind of French organization. Now, there's some places in Europe that really do thrive with esports. France is one of them. The culture that they're creating around esports is really, really kind of good. It is a little bit patriotic. There is people that are kind of diehard fans, and you do kind of see sometimes they will be discussing with other fans of the same team on Twitter or social media how, they're not all kind of extreme fans and stuff like that, but you do definitely get it. And obviously one of the big things about esports that puts a lot of people off is that those kind of voices are sometimes the loudest, and that doesn't accurately depict what esports is. One thing I found over the years is that the location that you're teaching esports or gaming in general actually changes a massive amount. So I will go on to kind of my accolades in a second, but one thing that I notice is depending on the geolocation of certain people, their ideas about what esports is become completely different. So if, say, for example, I'm teaching a student in China or Korea, which I've taught a fair few, you end up in this kind of situation where you can almost use your lens of esports in your country to determine what's happening elsewhere, whereas you really can't do that with esports. For example, I think the world's numbers that were leaked for China there was about 6 to 7 million viewers in the 2023 World Finals. That doesn't include any Chinese audience whatsoever because it's hard to get hold of that data. The sources that I have had have told me that it was about 130 million viewers in China alone. So when you're looking at 140 to even 150 million viewers over one event, you start kind of getting an understanding of where esports is going and why it's such a huge industry. Now, a lot of the times, obviously, when we talk with parents and stuff like that, it's about finding middle ground on explaining how big esports is and how viable it is as a career path. So, for example, one thing that I find often gets the idea through to people is not only showing them the size of the stadiums, but also going over events that are coming up. So, for example, for anybody that doesn't know, there's a bidding process every single year for the World Championship Finals of League of Legends, which is arguably the biggest game of all time in the esports world. And one thing that often gets people is the current bid for esports just got accepted. And the World Championships for the League 2024 season is actually going to be in the O2 Arena in London. So that entire arena is going to be filled to the brim of people from all over the world that are coming just to watch their favorite team play. Now, when we go back and look at this definition, and esports just shows that it's a multiplayer game, it makes some sense, but it doesn't give the emphasis of people are literally coming from all over the world. There'll be people from Korea, Australia, South America. There'll be people from everywhere coming to London next year just to follow their favorite team. And you might think some areas, might not come as much due to the expenses. Some of those areas are actually the most passionate. Things like South America are actually extremely passionate about esports. And even though they don't usually get a good representation in Worlds, you'll find that the Brazilian representatives that do come, their teams will be absolutely heaving. They'll have so much fan support behind them. Teams like, for example, Loud, who are absolutely massive, who do kind of go at other titles. They have such a massive fan base behind them that it becomes almost mind-blowing the extent that they will go through just to support their players. So we do have this kind of culture, and one of the biggest ones for me is inclusivity. So I'll go over that in a bit more detail in a second. First, I want to kind of explain my background in esports. So why am I sat here today telling you all these amazing things about esports and not somebody else? So I've done quite a lot of things over my time in the industry. I've been in the industry for roughly about 8 years in total. So I actually came to the industry kind of late in the grand scheme of things. I didn't come along until about 2013, 14 maybe. Whereas there are some people that have been in this for 20 years already and that have seen the entire evolution, but I can only talk from my experience. But 8 years in total of kind of teaching and kind of getting people excited about why esports is amazing. So in terms of my educational journey, I actually came into education because I do a lot of work around things like inclusivity and diversity, making sure that everybody has equal representation in the industry and everybody has an opportunity to show quite how amazing they are in those situations. So I decided to come into the education system after being in industry. I do still work in industry, so I still coach and run an academy and stuff like that. But I decided that I wanted to use my skills as a teacher and a coach to try and spark passion in the industry a lot more, because the industry is growing rapidly, but in the grand scheme of things, it's still pretty small. And what you do find is there will be kind of a lot of positions that are taken up by people that don't really care that much, and they just want to be kind of part of esports at times. So my educational journey consisted of me deciding to come back into education as a lecturer. I actually formed a college qualification at HSDC in the southeast of England. And basically from there, I decided that my next step was to come up to the university and kind of try and make as many industry to academic links as possible, because I am a very firm believer that the biggest thing that we can do within esports to help it grow. Now, I don't think it's a case of if it will grow at this point. I think that as soon as you start looking at esports, you realize it's a case of when it will grow rather than if. But the issue is a lot of the when it will grow is very much based around the systems that we put in place to facilitate that kind of expansion of the industry. So I have seen over the last 8 years the industry absolutely boom. But that's still over a long period of time. Now, there was also other times where the industry got a lot bigger, and this will kind of be a bit later in the talk. But in general, I wanted to come into education so that I could basically show people how amazing the industry can be, and basically show off some of the things that I've managed to achieve purely by staying committed to it, staying passionate, and also just looking to support whoever I can. So I've been head coach of multiple teams all the way up to Division 1 in Europe. So I played against teams like Astralis, who are arguably one of the biggest teams to ever exist in things like CSGO. So I've got to play against those kind of world-class organizations and teams. And I've also had the opportunity to put teams together with some of the best talent that Europe has to offer. Obviously, I ended up kind of falling into a coach role because I was previously a player. So I used to play for Cardiff when I was living there after university, during university. And through that, I managed to play on a stage, play in front of thousands of people, get to experience what it's like to kind of have that rush, or I usually call it vibrations, of when you're just about to get on a stage in front of tons of people, and me personally, I end up vibrating. Like, I don't know why. Like, I do get a bit nervous about being on stage when I'm playing, but I guess over the years I've changed that. So I've been head coach of multiple teams. I also run an academy as well that focuses on improvement through positive means. It focuses a lot on learning as a unit or as a collective, and basically just facilitating an environment where people can be wrong and people can fail. Because I think that's another really big thing that restricts esports quite heavily, is that everybody wants to be involved, but everybody is so afraid to fail because they think that, if I fail at something, then that means that everything else I've done is instantly discredited, when that is not the case whatsoever. You can fail, and some of the greatest minds in the world have failed many, many times. And I think that's one of the things that esports needs to learn. It's a very young kind of industry, and I think part of that comes a very young user base. So a lot of the kind of people that you see go into coaching roles, or a lot of people that are players, end up kind of progressing through esports, even though they're not a player. I mean, I did that personally. I was a player and then progressed into a coaching role. But this is one of the biggest issues is, in terms of the industry, a lot of people believe that if you can go down the path of being a player, then you can instantly go down the path of education. You can be a coach or stuff like that. Now, you do get some situations like you might have a strategical coach, which would be, a fairly good player themselves. But you do get them kind of situations where people go into it and a lot of the respect that gets thrown around is often due to how well you can play the game. So for me personally, I got kind of lucky in the fact that I'd played the game to a high level previously so that I could connect to players on that level. But this is just not sustainable in general, because the amount of time that you need to invest into playing actually takes a lot of time out of your ability to learn a lot of academic methods, standards, and kind of work on sort of being the best you can be. I think there was a famous quote around not having rules to influence you, because rules are set by other people, but instead using standards and standards of kind of performance and involvement to instead kind of set your own level of professionalism, which actually helped me a lot through my development of teams, because a lot of the people as well that are in the industry, replication is great, it's really good, but sometimes you get people replicating, say, strategies or team cohesion, stuff like that, from teams that are completely different. So being able to have the knowledge to kind of change that is really big. So also I'm a personal coach as well. People can hire me. I have I think around 3,500 students, between 3,000 to 35 at the moment, who I kind of oversee their journey and their growth. Some of them from at kind of the lowest ranks in the game all the way to the highest. That happens. Sometimes it's just a case of teaching people how to learn, and then through that they just fly with it. One of the biggest things that I found as a coach is, instead of teaching somebody what the absolute best answer is to anything, instead you want to work with them on their thought process, so that when you're not around, they still have the ability to think for themselves and also kind of improve on their own. So I also do projects such as Minds at Play, which is an incredibly important project to me. So I am somebody that is neurodivergent. I have ADHD, I have seizures, and esports gave me an outlet that I could learn in my own way, which was incredibly effective for me and taught me a lot about how bespoke learning is incredibly important within esports. And for me, as somebody that is neurodivergent, projects like Minds at Play are super important. So all Minds at Play is a project, is basically taking people who are neurodivergent or are scared to kind of jump into competitive league or other programs too, because they feel like the industry is too hostile. So what we basically do there is we get them in person. We'll host like a little event where we get them both in rooms. They'll play games against each other. And then what we do is we pull them out of those rooms, make them meet and make them discuss what actually happened in those games, including things like their feelings and their emotions and what kind of happened. Now, by doing this, we actually end up facilitating all kinds of people, and it's an incredibly inclusive kind of project. And that's kind of where I do see esports going. So I will just go into a bit more detail about that later. But I have created content for many years as well, for multiple different sites. Game Leap, goes through my academy, Skillcapped, which is a really big educational site also. So I also create content for those big sites and also for myself sometimes. And I also am on the Esports Wales stream team as well. So I have quite good connections with the Welsh ecosystem, because obviously I'm from Wales. So that kind of made sense as I grew as a coach, that I would end up being involved with Esports Wales in some form. So what are some of the current issues that esports faces? Now, this list could go on for a long time, so it is non-exhaustive, but these are just the things that I feel are some of the biggest issues. So we have a lot of different things causing these issues within esports. One of the biggest ones that I personally feel that I have experienced as a coach is genuinely just lack of business knowledge. What you find is a lot of a lot of esports is a passion project. So a lot of the people that are involved in esports, there isn't a large amount of money. People see these contracts worth 3 million. Faker, a super influential face in esports, he around 6 million a year just in team and kind of salary. So again, there is massive money, but one of the issues that people often focus on is they go, there is millions in esports. I want to do this. I want to be a multi-millionaire with esports in the next year or two, and that's where I see me going. And the harsh reality is that is definitely not the industry whatsoever. So a lot of the teams that you do find being successful, they're often passion projects by the people involved in those teams, either the owners or the managers, even the coaches. They are people that want to see the industry do well. So they put a lot into that kind of esports knowledge, especially for the game. But then they often overlook things like the business knowledge needed. So the business acumen needed to be able to create an organization that's going to be successful and is going to actually do well and can actually climb up. Now, obviously, you do have some kind of orgs that come in and they do have a little too much business knowledge, actually, and they do realize that esports is in a position that they can, in theory, pay for every step of the ladder and kind of go up that way. But often what you'll find is the cracks will start to show in those orgs and they won't address them and they'll just kind of ignore them a little bit. It's kind of like startup culture in a way, where it's a case of do as much as you can in a short period of time and go from there. Now, the issue is that esports is kind of going away from startup culture now, and it's starting to be more so a solid industry in itself. Obviously, there's still a lot of time for it to grow, but in general, that's kind of where it is. Another thing is obviously greed. Like I said, there is a lot of teams that just want to like get through the leagues as quick as they possibly can, get to the top, and then when they're at the top, they just go, oh, well, completely fine now. We've done everything that we can. And then they don't have the tools and the systems in place. Now, there are some orgs, I won't name drop any, but there are some that do the right things as well, like really, really well. And you can tell that their overall goal is sustainability. And from there, you can kind of see who is actually putting a lot more work into making the org work and kind of go from there. So I do feel like, obviously, I mean, maybe I come across a little bit biased, but I do think there is still a massive lack of education in the esports world. Obviously, I teach esports at Staffs. It's my full-time job, but it wasn't my full-time job because, I felt I had to. I did it because I wanted to. The reason I kind of came out of industry is because I realized, came into education from industry, is that I realized there's a lot of people that are trying to get through in esports, but they just don't have the education needed and the network that comes with that education to be able to actually do the right things and go down the correct pathways in esports. And I feel like this is obviously a really big thing. Obviously at Staffs, we do try and make the course have as many transferable skills as possible. And the reality of it is that, lack of education, it does kind of influence the industry in a very heavy way, especially since there's not a large amount of kind of academic theory coming through. And the more of that comes, the better overall, because that'll give us we'll be able to use scientific methods to actually determine what is working for esports and what isn't working. And there's a lot of people doing a lot of really amazing work in that area, but in comparison to other like STEM fields and stuff, there's just no comparison. So the lack of education is a really big one. Player recycling. So kind of what player recycling refers to is the same players will end up in positions. And I mean, it isn't just specific to players, to be honest. This can be staff members or just overall people in the organization as well. A lot of the time you do end up getting positions based on who you know, which I'm not a massive, I don't hate nepotism as much in an industry like esports. But the only thing that myself and a lot of other people in the industry do take issue with is when people end up with roles that they're not, I want to say qualified. They don't have the experience needed in order to excel at those roles. Like you find a lot of people that really just aren't passionate about esports. And one of the things that esports needs is passion, because if you go into esports, you accept that it is a very, very messy industry and there's a lot of things that go wrong a lot of the time. but you have to just keep going and trying your best. And if you don't have that passion to actually do it, then it's extremely difficult to teach. I think that if my passion ran out for esports, which I can't see happening, it would be a lot harder to actually teach it. But nearly a decade going strong, I'm pretty sure I'm good at this point. But that was always a concern because it really does rely on passion. Short term is the only focus for most, which is obviously a massive issue. If you're only focusing on the short term, you're going to end up in situations where, again, things come up that you don't realize. Lack of income in general, the esports industry does lack monetary incentive at the moment. So you do see a lot of kind of industry companies cutting down. You have things like Silicon Valley Bank going down, which did heavily impact a lot of esports teams that did have angel investors keeping them going. So that is something that's an issue too. And then another thing that's absolutely massive that people don't speak on much is the inflated stats that kind of come through with COVID. So as soon as COVID hit, I mean, esports boomed. But the issue is esports boomed because people could not go outside. Like, so if people can't go outside, what you end up getting, and one thing that I experienced as a coach, because for me, my coaching profile did end up expanding quite massively when COVID did come about, because a lot of the students that I'd have were people that would come and say, you know, I used to play League of Legends. I used to love playing this game. I used to be super competitive. I got to these ranks in 2014, and then I got busy full time and I stopped playing games. But now that I'm at home with COVID, I'm going to come back and play games. So this was actually a massively recurring thing. Over COVID, I probably gained about, I'd say about maybe 1,500 students, maybe 1,000 to 1,500. And I would say probably about 60 to 70% of those students were only there because they were stuck inside. So what happens with this is the esports industry inflates massively. And I'm sure this was also something that occurred in things like the games industry, stuff like that. But because it inflated so much, it's not an esports winter like a lot of people want to make out. It's more so just COVID fallout. It's the ending of, well, not the ending of COVID. It's going to be here for a while, but it's as COVID dies down and things go back to normal, you end up with this kind of situation where esports seems like it's dying and it's going through an esports winter. It's not. It's becoming sustainable again. And that is kind of one of the main kind of pushing points that needs to come. So kind of how do we solve these issues? So again, it's all well and good me sat here saying, yeah, this is what's wrong, but it's not on me. I actually believe that it's on absolutely everybody within esports to be working towards these goals. Because again, if you want to see the industry mature to the point that it should do sooner, then that's really important. Now, a lot of people often get this kind of sort of like FOMO that they need to get esports right during their time, or they'll become too old and stuff like that. And then when you say to people, what do you consider as too old? They end up, like 25, 26. And that's part of the issue, is that the user base that participate in esports the most are actually the ones that are determining what is the age range. When you have people like Faker, who 27 and is just won a world title. So we do have a question. Would you consider the volatile nature of current games to be an obstacle? For example, soccer ball and its pitch don't change, but gaming hardware and games do year to year. Marketing headache. I think that's actually a really great question, to be honest. I think you actually touched on some really, really important points there that I would actually love to expand on more. For example, you did use the football analogy. So this is an analogy that is used all of the time, where people, they say, well, how can esports be as big as football when I can just take a football down to a field and, kick about with some people? Now, when you actually kind of look into esports more, you realize, okay, gathering 10 people together in a field is actually probably significantly easier than sending 10 people a message on Discord and saying, hey, are you free to play in 30 minutes? Or sending 50 people a message, hey, are you free to play in 10 minutes? Those 50 people are then going to go yes or no, and all of a sudden, you've got more than 10 people straight away. So this is one thing I actually see with my academy. If I put out an event, hey, this is an event where we're going to get you all to play together, we end up with much higher numbers during those academy sessions because some people are there for specific coaches that we hire, and some people are there for learning certain things. So some coaches are better than others are. They play a different role, or they're an educator, stuff like that. So what I actually think is that esports is way more accessible in the fact that you can log on now. I can 2 clicks of a button and I'm in a game against another 9 players that are all participating within esports. So it's a very common question that does come up, and it's a really important one because, again, things like esports, people do want them to follow a similar path as sports, so things like soccer, because, again, people want someone to root for. Now, this is a bit off topic, but this is some of the amazing work that Slayer John is doing over at Esports Wales, and I think there are some Midlands working on this too, where they're trying to tie teams to certain areas. So, for example, I coach the Wrexham Robins a bit. It's my hometown. Of course, I'm going to help them out a bit as a one of the biggest coaches that's probably come out of Wales. But I ended up going and coaching that for next to nothing, purely because I'm like, okay, even though I've moved away now, Wrexham is still my hometown. It would be nice to see them win things. So once people start kind of collaborating more, which I'll go on about shortly, and kind of making a reason for people to support local teams, that's when esports is genuinely going to grow massively. And it is almost identical to the growth that football went through. But obviously, there are multiple things that do come into question when it does come to esports, like things you mentioned, like marketing, that does become difficult. But gaming hardware, genuinely, if you buy a PC now, like a £1,000 PC, obviously it's going to be a big investment, but that can go easily for maybe 5-6 years. My previous PC was, I think, about 8 years old, and I paid about £900 for that. So it's a lot of upfront investment, but a lot of the times with a lot of esports titles, they don't actually require that difficult, that strong of a PC to actually work. So it's not really needed as much, to be honest. Like, I've seen somebody play League of Legends off a Raspberry Pi, so a tiny little circuit that is just basically an operating system. You can, in theory, play League of Legends on that. It's not very good and it's not fun, but it's possible. So I think it's becoming more and more accessible. And even if you go and look at like the minimum requirements on games these days, they're genuinely not that high. If you want to run everything on ultra, you're gonna have to, donate a kidney or something. But in general, it's pretty good. So another question, Joey Lad: what strategies do you employ to keep your curriculum updated with the rapidly evolving esports industry? So one of the biggest things that we do is we make sure that the content that we're creating is directly related or correlated with the industry. We do this in a lot of different ways. Obviously, we have certain shooters that are industry focused, like myself, and then we also have others that are more academically focused. So what we end up doing is we end up hitting this really good middle ground where we're using academic literature to enhance what we're discussing, and then we're also able to bring in industry examples. So I use a lot of industry examples of things like my training plans and stuff like that. Even in this week, we went over some of my communicational strategies with the students in level 4, and we used real world examples of the content that I put together for a team and stuff like that. On top of that, we do things like live briefs. So we have certain partners, which some I can't discuss yet, wait until the new year, who we will get live briefs from them. So we'll sit down with somebody who is head of esports for the biggest team, to say the biggest teams to ever come out of Europe. We'll sit down with somebody in their organization that does this on a daily basis in the industry, and we'll say, okay, these are the learning objectives that we need them to achieve throughout this module. How, as an industry professional, would you see this changing based on your everyday work? So based on the work that you are doing in the industry, how do you do these specifics? And sometimes they'll come back and they'll say things that you just don't really think about. They'll come back and they'll be like, oh yeah, so I do this, this, and this. And you'll be like, wow, like I didn't even realize you're covering those things. And they're like, yeah, of course. So a lot of the times the esports industry isn't against education, which a lot of people do think. It's the esports industry in general is a bit of it's kind of the Wild West a little bit, and you do get people that are loud voices, but overall, I'd say the kind of vision of esports education is getting better, and the more that we're doing to kind of get industry involved and also invest into facilities that will benefit the students, the more it's going to continue to grow, and we will start seeing kind of record numbers of esports students, because again, it's becoming an everyday name. It's becoming something that everybody somewhat knows what esports is, for the most part anyway. People will go, okay, well, yeah, it's about playing games, right? Like, and then we go, okay, that's a good basis because you know the foundation of what esports is. But then you expand on it and you go, okay, well, it's not just about games. It's also about, you know, the marketing side of how to put a production together, how to brand yourself, how to be a content creator, how to set up streams, how to, you know, work with people on an individual basis to make training plans and strategies. And there's a lot more to it. So when I usually describe esports, like in the classic taxi journeys where, you know, they're, okay, what do you do? Oh, you work in the university. What do you do? Okay, esports. What is esports? I've never even heard of it. And then all of a sudden, all you can really say is it's the industry around competitive gaming. So it encompasses everything, including, like I said, the culture, and kind of all of those different elements that make it up as a whole. So again, it's kind of evolved past just, you know, people play games and that's about it. But yeah, making sure that we're constantly keeping up with the industry is super, super important. And it's something that I personally always do. So yeah, so how do we kind of fix some of these issues as well, right? So things like greed, how do we fix that? Well, one thing I tried to do for a long period of time is I tried to fix that from inside the industry. One of the issues that you get is there's a lot of people that they see other people doing things and having success with it, and then they just want to copy it and make it work instead of making a bespoke kind of idea and plan of what they're going to do. And then that kind of, again, it takes a hit. Like I mentioned earlier, you get teams where they'll go, we want to get to Division 1 straight away. We've never even stepped foot in esports. How do we do it? And as a consultant in a lot of these situations, I tell them, I'm like, well, to be honest, you're approaching it all wrong. You need to approach this as something of a passion project, and then just try and grow it as much as you can. Have a good time frame with some smart objectives that they can actually use and put into practice. So again, things like lack of education, I think that kind of speaks for itself. I think over the years, it's becoming a lot more accepted, especially when you've got countries like, for example, France that have, I want to say maybe like 15 plus different degrees in different areas of France, all based around esports. That's kind of one of the big kind of things to esports, is that kind of collaboration, which we definitely don't do as much. So you have things like player recycling. Honestly, this is going to happen for the foreseeable future, but as soon as the industry kind of evolves and matures a little bit more, which the sooner the better, but I am predicting about 3 to 5 years personally, we'll end up in a situation where once the government get involved and they start kind of regulating esports, a lot of people get worried about that, but the government regulation just basically means that a lot of people can't really get away with doing some of the things that they do, things like not paying players or not paying talent, the people at your productions. Those are kind of some of the big issues that currently plague esports. So being able to kind of really tackle them is going to be one of the big things. Short term is the focus for most, but this is kind of the worst thing. Some of the biggest teams in the world that you see, the reason why they're so big is because they retain certain key core members of their team. For example, T1 that have just won, they've had Faker as their mid laner since 2013. So for over 10 years, he has been their mid laner, and every iteration of their team has been around supporting him. You see this with other teams where they kind of, you have Fnatic who are just known for producing mid laners like Xpeke. I mean, Nemesis was amazing. You've got things like, well, even people like Humanoid, stuff like that are on the team at the moment. They're always world-class mid laners. You get like Perks, and well, Perks is a player that is kind of the staple for G2, or was for the longest period of time. And then you've got people on these big teams. So what the best teams will do is they'll retain their core and then they'll go on from there. But like T1, for example, as soon as Worlds finished, the first thing they did was re-sign all of their players. So these players are kind of they're massive fans of the orgs, and that helps them a massive amount as well, because that means that they're willing to push and they're willing to put more in. And in an industry like esports, where the top is very, very cutthroat, it is unfortunately going to be those that put the most work in that get there. But one thing that we need to do as educators is make it so that we are at least facilitating as much healthy kind of growth as we can without infringing on their ability to actually perform at the highest level. I had periods of times where I was playing these games way too much. So when I was maybe 19, 20, I'd sink 16 hours a day just into playing League. Oh, sorry, a bit later, maybe 21, 22, where I could just sink 16 hours a day into playing League once I finished my degree and just trying to kind of improve that way. Now, looking back, I realize I could have potentially done things different, but I wouldn't have changed it because it's got me to where I am. So it's really difficult to think of the long term, but the teams that do end up with the most success do end up retaining those players on multiple teams, and then just kind of going from there. So that's another really big thing. You do also get issues with teams, though. For example, people will get contract locked. So this is something that we are seeing a lot now. COVID is kind of calming down, and this is kind of where these inflated stats come from. During COVID, you ended up with this situation where a lot of players ended up having their salary increase massively because viewing numbers were up, and nobody really took into consideration why those viewer numbers were up. The fact that everybody was at home, in the same stroke, it's gone from everybody's instantly at home to everybody's instantly back into the office. So this means that esports has shrunk. Now, a lot of people will still kind of say things like, no, the industry is just dying and stuff like that. Unfortunately, I mean, that is the appearance that it gives. But I do believe that if you look at the stats from pre-2019 and before, you'd actually see that the certain games in esports are more similar to kind of that level of growth at the moment than what we currently have. And this is why you do see a lot of downsizing. So I don't think it's an esports winter. I think it's more of COVID fallout. But a lot of people didn't really, or a lot of orgs didn't consider the sustainability side of the orgs when they kind of made these decisions. So it's all well and good talking about what the issues are in esports, but I want to end on a little bit more of a positive note. So I want to go over kind of the future of esports. So again, we can get to this this eventually. Well, who knows? But it's just a meme. But there is a lot of kind of ways we can take esports, and where we go in the future is going to be really big. Now, one of the issues that I do see a lot with the esports is at times it does tend to kind of lend a lot of strategy from the gaming industry, and this is one of the kind of things that I think is bad for esports. So obviously in the gaming industry, it's a lot more competitive in terms of time, because I mean, in the game industry, your overall goal is to basically take the disposable time of the person that you want to be playing your game, and you want as much of that time as possible. You want to say, okay, well, if they've got 3 hours per night to play a video game, we want them playing Overwatch for those 3 hours, because then they are increasing our numbers, they're increasing our success, and go from there. Now, the issue I have with this is that when it comes to esports, it's more of a ecosystem that needs to be kind of grown and kind of have time to flourish. And the issue with that is when a lot of kind of esports personalities and stuff like that are often, my game is better than yours. Like if I was to sit here and go, League of Legends is without a doubt the best game ever, and if you've never played it, like, God, imagine. Like, that's not my goal as an esports educator. My goal as an esports educator is to go, okay, this is an amazing game. What can you get from that? Well, how can you use that to your advantage, and how can you build careers out of those things? So I think collaboration is something that needs to come through a lot more with esports, and I think it should kind of go a lot more similar to like the content creation world, so active collabs, getting together and playing games in a community, stuff like that. So another thing, I do think that esports is all inclusive. I have coached people from all walks of life. Like, again, 3,500 people might not seem like a massive amount. I guess I'm kind of detached from it, but 3,500 people doesn't seem like a massive amount. But when you consider that they're from all walks of life, all areas of the globe, they have different levels of requirements, they have different needs. You end up building these kind of bespoke solutions for so many students. And one of the biggest things for me as somebody that's neurodivergent is the fact that it is all inclusive. I'm somebody that I had doctors telling me, you probably won't be able to continue life the way it was. And for me, I could still be involved in esports. I could still continue my career and I could still progress because esports is for everyone, and genuinely everyone can be involved in one way or another. There's a lot of times where people pull up stats of, like 50, I think current stats are 48% of women play esports titles, and you get 52% of men. Actually, I think it's 51% and then 1% other. So even that, you get people like, oh, well, these stats don't matter because they include my 60-year-old auntie that plays Candy Crush like semi-competitively because she just plays it too much. Those are good those are good things. Like that is part of esports. And a lot of times people do want to get very elitist over what esports is, but we don't need to. It's all inclusive. It is for everyone, and we can do so many amazing things for it. We can create communities from esports titles. The amount of people that I have met over the past 8 years of my life being in this industry is absolutely crazy. I've met people that I would never have dreamt of meeting previously because we just didn't frequent the same circles or we didn't come from the same background and stuff like that. But it does not matter because we can bond over esports, and that can create those connections. So it's a way that the entire world, in theory, could be connected. So another question, do you think that a major factor behind the success of esports is how it is presented on social media? So I don't think that that's a major factor. I do think that, like I said previously, the negative voices are usually the loudest, because if somebody says esports is garbage and then some other person goes, okay, yeah, sure, if you think that, then yeah, it must be. And then all of a sudden loads of people always like get involved. We actually discussed this in the class today of kind of shared thoughts and things like people will follow on the thought processes of other people without questioning it quite often. And that is kind of one of the reasons why esports does get strangled a little bit. Because again, I do think that social media is a way for teams and orgs to show off what they're doing, show off the amazing things. A lot of the projects I've worked on that have actually been super progressive and really healthy for the scene, like things at Minds at Play, I'd never even seen them on socials personally. They're all the way in Australia, so that could be part of it. But the fact that you can kind of be presented with things on socials so easily does actually allow for massive growth. So I do think that social media plays a big part, but I don't think it's the deciding crux, especially when there's a lot of things like the collegiate scene is massive. In America, they're a bit more advanced. My collegiate team that I coach, their structure and everything is way better. And they also incorporate their students more because they've been doing it for a longer period of time. So it's just much better. So again, we can create these communities. We can create safe spaces, which is incredibly important, massively important. And sometimes, if you're frequenting Twitter lately, there is a lot of hate that does go around about these safe spaces, but the people running them do end up keeping their kind of cool, and they realize that there is a bigger picture. And even though there might be some people that don't understand the picture that they are providing yet, doesn't really matter because they're still going to provide those safe spaces. They're still going to provide those tournaments, like, for example, like Game Changers, stuff like that, for women and marginalized genders. Things like that are still going to exist because people are passionate about them. They're still going to do them, even though the mass people, like a lot of people might completely hate it, it's still going to exist. So again, extracurricular. So one thing we are going to be seeing over this next 3 to 5 years, in my opinion, is going to be esports implemented more in a extracurricular activity. So let's say, for example, when you're in high school, you have the classic, okay, which instrument do you want to play? Do you want to play the drums? Like, obviously I went for the drums. I was terrible. I ended up playing brass instruments. I learned a lot from that. I ended up in a brass band and everything, but that was because that opportunity was provided for me. Whereas in schools, I believe that this is what's going to happen next as well. We're going to have these kind of esports teachers that are going to come in and, you know, teach people, okay, you're already playing games anyway in your free time. This is how to play them healthily. This is how to potentially make a career out of them. And this is how you can really get involved in esports in a safe way. And I think that's going to be another really big shift that we'll have soon, which already exists in other countries, but the UK is just a little bit slower on things like that. You have some of the powerhouses in Europe, like Denmark, for example, who even as far back as like 6 or so years ago, I was coaching players on teams that were all within the same gaming room at their college or university. I can't remember which one, but that was literally, we're talking about 2014, 15, maybe even later, maybe about 2016. But because those countries had those kind of things in place way earlier, the players that they're producing in those countries are significantly better. A lot of really talented players actually come from places like Denmark, where they support the kind of ecosystem of esports, which is something that we are about 10 years behind in comparison to the kind of Asian kind of regions, but we are slowly catching up. So again, once we create these kind of spaces to allow esports players to flourish, we'll be in a much better position. This will become a part of kind of everyday life eventually. A lot of people already know what esports is. And again, we can also foster this kind of healthy competition where it's not just a case of 5 players smashing their heads against each other and hoping one person comes out and manages to carry. We can actually create healthy competition where everybody can feel safe, improve their esports knowledge, and also participate in something that can potentially change their entire life. Like for me, esports genuinely changed my life. I was doing computer science before that because that was the only kind of thing that existed back then that was kind of esports related. A lot of people I know also did similar. They went into computer science, stuff like that, because that was the first thing that was around. But I bet that if I asked 80%, 90% of the people I've worked with in the industry, if you could go back and do an esports qualification, would you? They would snap your hand off instantly. And it's because once you've been in the industry, you realize, you know, that this is hard. And I wish I had those tools previously so that, you know, I could flourish better. So in conclusion, obviously, esports is not going anywhere, but we need to do more to kind of support the next generation to follow their passion and work towards achieving goals rather than goals others think are good for them. The world is changing at a record pace, especially with esports. And genuinely, if we don't keep up, that's on us. One of the classes that I actually get a lot of success with the students is basically just showing them a hidden leopard on the board, which this works in every class. I show them a hidden leopard on the board and I explain how adaptation and evolution is something that is part of our nature. And we need to apply that into things like the esports industry also, if we want to see that grow and basically become what it should be at an earlier pace. I think it's always going to get to that point. I think if we put more pressure on kind of doing the right things and fostering the industry in a healthy way, I'd say 3 to 5 years. If we continue to do some of the issues that we are currently having, then I think it's probably going to be about 10 years. So hopefully we can inspire the next generation so we get to that point quicker. But I think that point is a singularity in a way. It's kind of inevitable at this point. But we just need to facilitate that as much as possible. So I did leave a little bit of time for Q&A. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them away. Happy to cover anything, even if it's not related to anything in my slides. Even if you just have a question about the industry, feel free to ask away. We'll take a few before we wrap up. YouTube's popping off, huh?
Hello. That was awesome.
Yeah, we will give a few minutes for questions, so we'll stay around for that. If you do want to offer us some feedback, we do have a feedback form here. Beat me to it, Jamie. So if you want to fill out some feedback for us, you can. That was very interesting, Reese. You seem
Thank you.
very passionate
Of course.
about esports. So
Yep. I want to see it work. I want to see this industry help the people that it should be helping. I think there's a lot of people that can benefit from esports that don't even know it.
Absolutely, and the university has actually just injected a lot of money into our esports department as well. So, if anyone that is watching that isn't currently a university student, we do offer a degree in esports. So, if that interests you and what Reese has spoke about today has like invigorated you or has made you passionate, you can reach out to us and apply to study for esports.
Yeah.
I appreciate you broadening my understanding of what esports actually is.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing that people don't realize. It started off as competitive gaming, and now there's an entire culture. I did an entire class the Tuesday before, week 8, that was purely based around here is this culture that Riot Games has created through their videos and through the content that they put out. And you find that there's so many smaller game studios that copy the same kind of vibes and the same kind of excitement that they're trying to portray in those videos, because it becomes culture and it becomes, I guess for a better word, the meta to do a similar thing to what Riot Games are doing. And it's pretty big. Yeah.
Oh, we do have a question.
Yeah. How do you approach teaching or reducing psychological aspects such as tilt management or mental resilience, which is so crucial in the competitive scene, especially for younger players? So there's a few different things I do for this. So one of the biggest things is just explaining the mechanisms behind why things like tilt exist. So one thing that people don't realize is, without going too scientific, when you get emotional in a game, your entire it kind of triggers your fight or flight response slightly, which part of that increases your blood pressure through bursts of norepinephrine, stuff like that. And what you find then is, because your heart rate is elevated, your prefrontal cortex, which is basically your emotion zone, ends up getting a massive amount of blood to it, which then puts you in a position where, even though you might not feel tilted, you're not able to focus on what you're actually doing. So sometimes just explaining the mechanisms behind the anatomy of how that actually works is enough for a lot of players. But there's a lot of different methods you can do. Things like, even though some players hate it, younger players, usually you gotta, do I have to meditate? Like, I don't want to do guided meditation between a final game. Like, I'm not that tilted. Like, so things like meditation, just simply breathing, funny enough, sending your players outside to get some fresh air is actually massively underrated. And yeah, just things like that are super, super important, but people just don't realize it a lot of the time. So again, it's always bespoke to the player. You have some players where you can facilitate certain understanding, and that will be plenty for them. You get some players that need to actually action the results. So it's hard to give a catch-all. It's very player-focused and it's very bespoke. But again, things like tilt and mental, like tilt doesn't come from a negative place. One thing I often say is, a lot of really toxic players, they're not inherently toxic. It's a learned, I was going to say skill, but it's a learned condition, I guess. It's something that you're not born toxic. You gain it through your environment and your the factors. So often what you need to do is actually strip the toxic players back and go like, okay, well, where did this toxicity come from? And usually you'll find that they're just players that really wanted it very bad, but just could not put themselves in the right situations. And then that ends up being the main cause most of the time. It's just that kind of drive that they previously had, and they'll often compare themselves to previous variants of themselves and stuff like that, which is often, it's straight to, it just makes things very, very difficult. But yeah, so yeah, it's really, really big. So yeah, so I think,
cool.
If there's any more questions, let us know, but I think we're almost at the end now.
I believe we are at the point where we need to wrap up. Yeah. Thank you very much for that, Reese. I want to very quickly, before we go off live, just go through what we have coming up tomorrow. We are starting with the wonderful Anthony Martin with a talk on becoming a one-person VFX animator with Blender and After Effects, and that's at 12 till 1. After that, we have a it's me with a brief history of all the men I've dated in video games and the mechanics involved from 1 till 2. After that, we have a talk from Jennifer Challenor with Love Possibly, dissecting the tension between NPC autonomy and player agency from 2 till 3. And we end tomorrow with the good and bad and ugly of season-based esports from 3 till 4 with Cameron Van Loo. Thank you very much again to yourself, Reese. That was a fantastic presentation.
And thank you all to everyone that has participated today. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And as always, if you do have any feedback or anything you want to offer us, you can fill out the form and we can act on that. So again, thank you for coming to visit. Thank you to all of the talent that has spoken today and has offered their expertise in various fields. And thank you, Jamie, for helping out today. I appreciate the efforts, and thank you, Reese.
Anything to get my face on the internet.
Everyone have a wonderful night. Have a fantastic rest of your week, and we'll see you tomorrow at 12.
See you later, everyone.
Bye-bye.